Welcome everyone back to the channel, and we've got another exciting episode, and I'm joined this time by someone you usually see me on the other side of the screen. I've got the godfather of Carlton YouTube in Big Terry Degani, so you should all know him. If you don't, I'm confused. All of his links are in the description. But Terry, welcome to the show.
What an honor, mate. Thanks for inviting me. I don't get many invites as we know, but I appreciate it.
Hey, I'm not scared to slide into your DMs. I'm not scared. But, I mean, this is an exciting one for me because I talk a lot of rubbish about my football team. So I am looking forward to this one where I just sit back and ask the questions about Carlton Football Club instead of trying to answer the questions. So this is exciting for me as well.
Mate, I'm excited for someone to ask me questions. Like, it's honestly, the feeling is mutual.
Well, obviously, we've just had the season. We're in the off season and the start of 2025. But from my point of view, 2024, we count, and I think we were one of the teams everyone was talking about could potentially go on and win the flag. And it started well. It kind of ended a little bit iffy, and we showed a little bit. It was kind of at the last game of the season was like our season. It was bad, then it was good, but ultimately it fell short. How do you feel now we've had 3 months off about the 2024 year?
Am I over it? Kind of have to be. The thing that is just so ridiculous to me, and it will continue to be ridiculous, it's like everything this club has been through. Forget about the 30 years drought. Like, forget about that for a minute. Let's just say the last 5 years, 5 to 7 years, right? It's just like, really, like, it came down to mismanagement at the end of the day. Just mismanagement decisions when it came to players and injuries and things like that. And yes, some of these injuries were out of our control, but got to ask the question about what was in our control. And when I say in our control, I mean like the decisions for managing them and things of that nature. And it's like, really, we're really talking about like mismanagement, like at this point, like it's like, are we really ready to climb up the ladder and be a contender when we're going to still be making these decisions? So that part is the part that's worrying me. But, you know, when you're in sport and when you're competing, they're all lessons, and you know, you just keep failing until you succeed, kind of thing. So I do understand the perspective of it. It's taken me a while to find it because it just felt like we had really turned the corner, especially after last year making the prelim, and there was a bit of a thought like, oh, we're gonna be able to replicate that, or the boys going to crumble under the pressure of expectation. So I thought we nailed it until we didn't.
I think that's brilliant how you've described that, because it does feel like it's weird covering all the other teams, and I'm quite complimentary of the other teams. One thing that I do notice now, though, is when I look at Carlton, it does stack up. When I look at my Sydneys, I look at my Brisbanes, I look at the team, I'm like, they're just as good. Like, we are in that echelon, and even speaking to other fans, they do look at Carlton as, oh, that's a danger game. That's a tough game. Feels like we are so close, but there is something just slightly missing. And I agree with you. Is it mismanagement? Is it consistency? It just feels like we've got everything, just the application isn't quite there.
Yeah. I was doing an interview with another podcast on Monday night, and they're from Perth, these boys. 2 of them are Fremantle supporters. And they made a comment to me like, oh, Carlton's just got this aura when they're up and about. And that was really interesting to hear from them, because I obviously think we have the aura, but that's because I'm biased. So like, there is now this fear about us from opposition teams when they play against us. And if Carlton are informed, they're worried and mindful of us. And then when you look at it from a Carlton fan point of view, it's like, we literally as a club just get in our own way.
We do. We are our own worst enemy, aren't we? Like, the best team to beat Carlton is Carlton.
Is Carlton.
Well, did you find, and I did this podcast as well with Swoop, and we talked about their plan in the off-season that went against everything that everyone was talking about. Carlton fans, like ourselves, have been demanding ruthlessness, the tough calls, and the off-season, I think, was probably the most obvious selections ever, but it was an air of ruthlessness from what we've seen. All the injured players were jettisoned. They made the bold call to get rid of Mathew Cox to back in the young small forwards. They went hard at pick 3 as well to bring in more established, young, developing talent. Did you feel that that was maybe a changing of the guard? Because that was so un-Carlton-like to do the obvious thing and do the right thing as opposed to what's the sentimental thing. Did you enjoy that off-season?
I loved it. I think the best spot to be in is when the fan base is generally wrong. When the fan base has a bit of a shock factor, I think that's a good thing. And then even just seeing this fresh wave of energy that's come into the club with the Twins and Farrell and, you know, obviously the hype around Jagger being the 3rd pick and all of a sudden you've got nothing against Jack Martin and Marchbank and Cunners, but it just, the energy was stale. It was frustration on both sides. They would have been more frustrated than anybody that they couldn't get their bodies right. That frustration was felt by the fans. It was felt by the coaching staff, team selection, you know, planning for the group moving forward. So just a frustrated energy. So now to inject, you know, 4 or 5 guys into this group, if you want to add Nick Haynes into that group as well, just fresh energy and a fresh perspective. And your core is still there and they're in their prime and they're relatively healthy now. So I'm stoked. And I think going after pick 3 the way that we did, that was bold. That was a bold move. That was something that, I mean, there's a bit of talk about being ruthless, and I think going after a Houston would have been the standard Carlton play. But going after a pick 3 in a draft that they obviously identified as a great draft, whether that proves to be the case, we'll see. I think it was a bold move, and I just hope that people aren't too short-sighted with it. There seems to be this idea that the window's only got 1 or 2 years left. I disagree. I think the window can be as open for the next 3 to 5 years, maybe more. So, yeah.
We are a club that is often dictated to by the media, or appeal. It seems to from the outside looking in. If the media say one thing, it feels like we want to appease that. And the Dan Houston one is really interesting. And something you've touched on there as well about the window. We see a lot of clubs like Collingwood try and hold the door open with their approach this year, going to establish talent. It did feel like Carlton were not only sticking 2 fingers up at the media by not pursuing Houston to the ends of the earth, but also saying we don't have to keep the door open. We can plan so that door is indefinitely open. And that's what I felt Jagger meant to this football club. It feels like the club has said, let's not wait till we're all 35. Let's start building now to keep this door ajar.
100%. Yeah. I think, I mean, we are an impatient fan base. Maybe most fan bases are impatient, but I think a club like ours with a history and all of that. So I do understand it's like win now while you can. But I just think for some reason we look to Cripps and say, well, he's 30. So like he's closer to the end. And yeah, okay, he probably is close. He definitely is closer to the end than the start. But like you look at just underneath that layer, you've got the Wiederings, the Mackays, the Kernos, the real spine of the group. Like we're talking about 26, 27-year-olds. So I have learned to appreciate the delayed gratification. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think we can still win it in 2025. I just think, like you said, it's going to hold the door ajar a little bit. And also, you don't want to get to 2028, 2029, and you're in a bit of a pickle because Tasmania is here. So the club's been proactive in that point the way I see it, and I'm here for it.
And I feel like, and I'd love to know your take on this, Carlton's midfield is probably the most talked about midfield since I've been here. And I think people kind of lose sight that I remember 6 years ago, everyone said we couldn't run. You've seen 6 years of targeting elite runners. We've got all the energy in the world there. And maybe we haven't got the speed that people want, but we've got that ability to run you down from minute one to the last minute. TDK last year, I thought, really came of age, and I think that that's probably the big excitement for Carlton. When you look at Carlton's midfield, on paper, it has to be said it's in the top three. Do you feel we're going to see that really bear fruit? Because that feels such a sticking point of our football club, doesn't it? That midfield group.
Yeah, there's some tinkering and an evolution that's coming. Kennedy, who played most games, and he was in the mix there, and he's not going to be there anymore. There's talk about Cooper Lord, Elijah Hollands maybe getting more rotations through there, Jagger Smith coming in. So the crux of it is all there. The ball winning ability, I think, is up there with any midfield group in the league. It's just the way in which the ball moves, the efficiency with which the ball moves. That is the thing that we're still chasing, the way I see it. So I think, at the end of the day, we finished 8th, and therefore we're right smack bang in the middle of the group, of the competition. And so some changes need to be made. And I am excited for a bit of a refreshed energy in that midfield group.
And it looks like it's started already. All the pre-season reports, we're seeing Ollie move to halfback, which we saw a bit last year, to some great success. And the Nick Newman playing up on the wing, that seems to be the first stage of Carlton trying to change something, because the one issue with Ollie, I think we'd all agree, is his ball-finding ability. Doesn't get it enough, where Nick Newman seems to find that ball at will. Does that kind of excite you, that Carlton have obviously identified Ollie's good defensively, very strong, does his job, but Nick Newman, we have seen it at times. West Coast 3 years ago when he played the wing, there was a different dimension with him. Does that kind of excite you, that Carlton are trying to find within, as opposed to going out and buying it? They're starting to adapt the talent they already have.
Yeah, it's all there. It's all there. The pieces are all there, whether they move them around. I think we saw the trust earned pretty quickly, if you think about it, with a guy like Lockie Cowan and the way he operates behind the ball. And I think Nick Newman in the last couple of years has really, he's really elevated his decision making. He's always been a good decision maker, but he seems to find the ball more than what he ever has. And he finds himself at more stoppages than what he ever has. And yeah, more experience on one of those wings is going to help. Ollie did a thankless job for a long time. First of all, because it's a thankless task. Secondly, because he was still a first or second year player. So he'll start coming into his own from here on in, maybe a couple more pre-seasons and more layers of power through his body and strength and those things. But we saw towards the end of 2024, that running power he always had, but he seemed to find something else. So yeah, it's very early to tell whether these moves are going to be permanent, but the idea of Nick Newman moving up the ground, the idea of Brody Kemp playing forward, Ollie behind the ball. Haven't spoken about Jack Silvani, if that's going to be something that happens, but yeah, let's just it's a big watch and see.
Got to say, as a Carlton fan, I was excited that the 2 pre-season reports that you've done so far have shown Jack Silvani staying in the forward line.
Who would have thought?
Pickle me relieved. But we do look at Carlton's list, and this is an interesting little stat. And we always talk about age, but we always forget about games. And Carlton have been weird the last 3 years, because although the age gets higher, the games played in the AFL seems to be lower. And this is the first time in a long time Carlton now go into the year 6th oldest with the 7th most games played in its list. So you could argue, if you look at 2025, there's a lot of players out of contract. Suddenly the list makes sense that you've got the 6th oldest list with the 7th most experience there. It's almost like Carlton over the last 3 years have been planning for this, where we're ploughing games into younger bodies, getting the experience levels. The list is at an equilibrium. Going into 2025, what are your vibes? Do you feel like this is the time that Carlton can put their hands up and go, we're a serious contender, we're not a pretender?
It's the perfect storm in the way I look at it. fresh fitness guy in, fresh method of keeping bodies fit and available. 16 or so players out of contract. So playing for your life at all times. Everyone, I mean, psychologically speaking, I don't have the number in front of me for sure, but I just think when a player's out of contract in that upcoming year, there's just so much more extra motivation to be at their best than what it is if they had signed a 2, 3, 4 year deal. I think it's just a psychological relief. So to have that over the heads of so many players who have to put their best foot forward creates, that high pressure environment, combined with the fact that the games played, the experience, the failures, the lessons, and, probably for them on the inside, I mean, they would have thought as much as anyone that they were as good as any team in the comp until it all fell apart. And it got to a point where some of these things were out of their control with these injuries. So, a bit more heartbreak and more so just belief that they're good enough to be at the top. And that's something that's evolved over only the last couple of seasons. So, yeah, I do think for the next couple of years at least, we go into every year thinking we can win it. Just a matter of whether they do or not. Oh, plus the fixture. Very nice fixture. As it seems right now.
It's one of them fascinating ones. I mean, I've got to admit, as a Carlton fan, I have been quite fair on this channel and said, I don't know how we've got so lucky. But obviously, it's something you judge at round 12 because we saw last year, Hawthorn, everyone was saying there's 2 wins. And by about round 10, you saw Hawthorn were pretty tasty. So no doubt some of them teams. But going into this year as well, do you think is a real interesting narrative that I don't want the media to forget? The media noise about Patrick Cripps last year was kind of, he was plodding. And I remember you and me have discussed this quite a bit on Blue Abroad as well. He wasn't kind of getting the kudos. Charlie Curnow's come under a lot of heat last year that he wasn't performing. But again, he's finishing the upper echelons of key forwards. Do you find it fascinating with Carlton that there's a lot of players that probably are victims of their own high standard? Because I remember round 16, people saying Cripps wasn't as dominant. He ended up destroying the Brownlow. So obviously the powers that be did it. There's quite a lot of players I feel though didn't reach their potential last year. Do you look at Carlton and think there's a massive step up that they can take because they're already good? There is probably something there in the locker, isn't there?
Totally, yeah. I mean, if you take the Charlie Curnow example in isolation, it was really the first time in his career that the footy world has been able to find critique in his game. And why I say that is because his first few seasons, he was still a teenager, early 20-year-old. Then he misses 2 years. And then the narrative is, oh, well, he'll be lucky to play. So then we get to 2022 when he finally comes back and he obviously dominates. And so positive rhetoric, 23 backs it up, positive rhetoric, 24, 57 goals. Okay, not his best, but still anyone in the competition will take a 57 goal a year forward if you offered it to them. So the fact that we even found something to possibly critique him for as a footy world, and if that's the worst critique he's going to get, we're in a good spot. I think just goes to show what you just said, that the high standard that these players put on themselves because of their brilliance. So, yeah, I mean, look, Carlton is it's an attention machine. You talk good about them, it's never going to be as popular as if you talk bad about them, if you're one of these media outlets, because you're going to get the reaction that you want. If engagement is down, which as we move more and more into the future, it will be, you just know that story about the Blues and, you've got like 4 or 5 buttons you can push. Vossi's future, has Patrick Cripps slowed down? Charlie Curnow, is he the same? Like, there's so many buttons you can push if you're a media outlet that is going to get a great reaction. So we'll just have to see how that plays out. I mean, if we're winning games, then it's just going to be hyperbole. Is this the greatest team of all time? And does this team stack up to the 1995 team? So we've all got to find a way to just find that equilibrium.
It is fascinating, I think, the narrative with our 2 keys, because they were 4 goals less together this year than they were last. But we remember the year before last, everyone was saying Harry was cooked. It's Charlie Curnow or bust. This year, they were almost neck and neck on goals, which was exciting. I think the other narrative people forget is Matty always leaving. Everyone's at Carlton predominantly are upset. They forget the year before, though, Jesse Motlop was just behind Owies in goals. And it's obvious the club has backed in that forward line. When you look at Carlton, what do you think? Which department is holding us back? When you look at Brisbane, Sydney, the teams that seem to always be there, is it as simple as the small forwards need to get involved more? Charlie and Harry need to do Harry and Charlie things. The midfield needs to dominate. Where do you see the big improvement in 2025 needed to happen?
It's still half forward for me. Well, so forward line in general, but like that half forward line, a few players chopped and changed this year. Zach Williams is going to find himself there more. You know, Ashton Moyer is a name that we want to see more of. Cottrell missed a good chunk of the year. He's going to float there. Sam Doherty was talked about as being a half forward / mid wing. So I still think we haven't rectified that. Combined with a bit of a new dynamic in the midfield, I do think our defense is set. I mean, we talk about depth, and in the event that Jacob wasn't playing for whatever reason, touch wood. So like there's that. But I do think when they're all available, our back line is still our strongest. But I do think our forward line has the most potential, and we just haven't been able to really get this forward system humming, mostly due to the fact that too many players are coming in and out over the last few years. So if we can just get it settled, find our groove, like I don't see why we can't be averaging over 100 points a game.
It's crazy that you say average 100 points a game, because it only feels like yesterday that the club was averaging 80 and was being criticised. It can't kick 100 points. It's amazing how quickly the narrative in ourselves shifts that, I'd love to kick 100 once, to where we actually see that as the minimum expectation. It's crazy how quickly your narrative can change.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Took us how many games to break the 100 barrier? For how many years?
It was a lot. It was a lot, wasn't it?
Well, we celebrated it like specifically.
It's crazy. But I mean, that being said, Terry, we're going into this year. What do you think is the pass score for you? Like for you to do this show next year, minimum expectation, what do you think the pass score is for the Blues?
You got to make the granny. You got to get there. You got to get there. Top 4 home finals at the MCG. I understand you probably can only really ask of like getting to that prelim week. Can you really ask and demand a team to make a granny? I don't know. I just think they're so ready. If not now, then when? Maybe the year after. But yeah, for me to be happy from a results point of view, it's like 17-ish wins. Give yourself the best chance by making the top 4, getting that preliminary final at the MCG, and then you get to grand final day, and you know the whole energy of us gets added to whatever they're going to be doing on the field, and you know it's going to be a magical day.
You know what I am really excited about, Terry, is not just that the granny is the minimum expectation, but also the fact we've talked 25 minutes and not mentioned that I word injury, which I think last year you've nailed, where you said we give the energy. Last year, by about the bye, every week it was which player's injured now, the club's not telling us about. And it felt like that was all the focus, and it seemed to get worse the more we panicked about it. I love the fact that the season is over now and we're not even thinking about that as a possibility, which seems to be, in my time doing this, every year, the major concern is the muscle density of a 19-year-old or who's going to be injured by Christmas.
Yep. We just want minimal news as possible. It's a fresh slate. There's only 3 or 4 guys who at this point aren't doing contact. But otherwise, it seems like there's a full list to choose from. And like I said earlier, I do believe it's the perfect storm. Like, this is it. This is us. We've been through too much for it to just fall away and like not play finals next year. Like, nah, this is like the sweet spot in this group's existence.
Does feel, and I did mention this to the Brisbane show we did of this version, that us and Brisbane have been like the brother and sister in this rebuild, and we've always been compared to Brisbane. It's like, oh, well, Brisbane started the rebuild a year and a bit before Carlton. This is where they are, so Carlton will be there. It would be very poetic if we won the year after them, when that has been seemingly the media noise for the last decade of Brisbane started before Carlton. This is what Carlton need to achieve. Wouldn't it be poetic if we went after them, like we won it the year after them, and kind of validated the noise of the last decade?
Could be playing them in the granny, mate.
Mate, don't get me excited in December. Way too early to start thinking about flags.
I wonder how many people... There will come a point in time next season where the belief will be there again. And I wonder how many people are going to be flying from around the world this time around just to get to Melbourne. Because like, you got to kind of plan for that. Like, you got to plan. And then it's like, you got to put the moz on them or whatever. But there will come a point in time where that belief is at its peak. And, can they handle the fact that if the fan base get a sniff that the year is coming, that the fan base will start making plans accordingly and acting accordingly and getting excited accordingly. And so can they just stay level-headed? Because I do think they're going to be really good next year. If I believe that, 16, 17 wins is the kind of year we're looking at, that means we're a pretty good team next year. And so with that, it can be bad, it can be good. Just their ability to handle it and stay present is the big challenge.
Maturity, isn't it? I think even in the fan base as well, there's been a level of maturity shown since September to now. In my opinion, this is the most mature circle of Carlton I've ever witnessed. That there doesn't seem to be outlandish claims for the fan base. There doesn't seem to be outlandish hope from the football club. It does seem for the first time it's just professional. This is business. We're going into a season as one of the contenders. This is normal.
Yep, I agree with that.
Exciting times. Well, Terry, obviously it's December, and this is the hardest time for people like you and me because there is no football, so we have to actually get creative. It's a bit like Vossi in the finals with 12 players fit. What are you up to in the off-season, Terry? Tell the people.
So I am flying to Thailand. I'm actually leaving on New Year's Eve. And then I'll be 4 hours north of Bangkok on a 42-day, let's call it rehab. It's a Muay Thai training camp with a bit of yoga sprinkled in there. So in the middle of nowhere, 65 people from all around the world, training every day, yoga, they cook for you, just getting the mind right. And then I'll be back sort of mid to late February. And every year. I mean, I'm doing a preseason to prepare for this giant task at hand.
Mate, that is exciting. I'm looking forward to that because you did it last year. I mean, we're both in preseason at the minute. I mean, you've got like a 41-day one, like because I'm fat. I'm like Jared Pickett at the minute. I'm doing a preseason before my preseason, so I'm excited about that. But Terry, it's always a pleasure. It's always nice just to let you talk and me shut up, and we'll probably have you back before you go anyway.
Mate, much love. Thanks for everything you do for the Carlton community. And speak soon. Go Blues.
Go Blues.
I see her rolling up, Uber black Cadillac, high heel boots and a sexy body full of tats. Baby's bad.